Joining us right now, Congressman Jodey Arrington. Good morning, Congressman.
From Hockley County, home of the Levelland Lobos.
Well, there you go. What are you doing in
West Texas?
What are you doing in Hockley County today?
I'm going to talk with some folks at the county courthouse. I'm going to meet with the sheriff. Talk about it's hard to believe as a kid who grew up in rural America and just up the road in Plainview about the meth and the opioid crisis, mental health, a lot of the things that the law enforcement officials deal with today that they didn't back when I was in junior high and high school. So I'm looking forward to visiting with the leadership out here, and especially my friend Sheriff Ray. That's not his last name, by the way, but that's what I call him.
Well, very good. Well, I know you had a town hall earlier in the week. How did that go?
It went well. The people, everybody was respectful of each other and let each other ask questions and share their concerns, which is what it's all about, and gave me an opportunity to share my heart with them on these very, important, sometimes emotion-packed issues on health care, on guns, on the tax reform. And so, Chad, I thought it went really well. I was very pleased with it, and I thought it was a success.
Well, and I knew you had a couple of questions over guns, and at least that's what was highlighted by some here in the local media, is that you had some questions on that. One question that I had for you, and I'm not sure where exactly this legislation is right now in the House, but there was a bipartisan bill that's already been filed that the target was going to be bump stocks. And the last time I had you on, you said we don't need to do any knee-jerk reactions. We need to wait, take our time, find out what's going on. In this bill, the way the language is, it's very vague. And one of the, I believe one of the authors is a Republican out of Florida. And it's a very vague bill that would, many in the industry, including the NRA, say this would possibly and probably ban more than just bump stocks. This would, affect trigger modifications and more. Have you seen this piece of legislation? Have you heard about it? And what are your thoughts overall now that we're a couple of weeks removed from the shooting in Las Vegas?
Well, here are my thoughts. First of all, there are a lot of good Republicans and Democrats that don't agree with me on this. They're more moderated on this issue. I'm very concerned because you cannot legislate against evil and crazy. You can do your best to improve awareness and intervention, but as we say, guns don't kill people; people kill people, and you have a high threshold. You can't be a felon and carry a gun. You can't go into a crowded theater and shout fire. So there are some parameters or limitations, but it needs to be very high, because when you start to limit somebody's fundamental rights, you then, and especially on the Second Amendment, then you actually make it harder for the good guys to protect themselves. So that's still the framework. Now, so I'm very wary of legislation right now. I'm not going to sign on to legislation right now. I want Congress and the administration to have hearings, and I want the facts. ATF under President Obama approved the bump stock. So, and I don't want the ATF and some bureaucracy to make a decision. Congress ought to be dealing with an issue that has to do with our fundamental rights. And so we need to get the facts there and not, again, overreact, and have a little arm's length from the incident, which breaks all of our hearts. But again, that's my position. I'm very wary of people who are putting out legislation after an incident like that. It's usually more leaning towards gun control. However, and I want to be clear, if the bump stock effectively makes this an automatic, then we need to look at it and consider appropriate oversight, like we do automatic weapons. And but I'm not going to rush into that deal until I get the facts and we have hearings. That's the way this ought to go down.
Is your fear that any legislation that is written will be that slippery slope towards gun control that, the bump stock from everything that we've heard that can be replicated without purchasing anything. That no matter what piece of legislation is put out, it is, depending on who it's written by at least, it could be way too vague, and that we could see other things banned that was not even discussed, not even talked about in Las Vegas.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's plenty of options for us to look at and consider outside of gun control and limiting our Second Amendment rights,
right.
With respect to trying to intervene and prevent these things, although you'll never prevent them in a fallen world. We've seen it from the beginning of time. But, yeah, the slippery slope deal is what I'm talking about. That's why I wouldn't overreact, because I know the agenda of a lot of the folks that are putting out legislation and weighing into this. It's appropriate to when you're looking at all the factors, to look at the bump stock. I'm not suggesting it isn't. I think that's a reasonable thing and a responsible thing to do. But, again, when people look at the history of the Second Amendment, it's not even there just for, it's not a hunting or even just to protect yourself and your family against criminals. Listen to what George Washington said. He said, a free people ought not only be armed and disciplined, but they should have sufficient arms and ammunition to maintain a status of independence from any who might attempt to abuse them, which would include their own government. Now, that's a guy, like our other founders, who are very sensitive to the fact that that guns and our ability to own them and possess them is the last line of defense against a tyrannical government. So that's the basis of the Second Amendment, and so it's sacred. And I'm going to wade through this with the facts, and I'm going to do it with lawmakers, not bureaucrats, and not folks who are, coming to the table with an agenda on either side, quite frankly.
Congressman, if you don't mind, we're going to place you on hold. We'll keep you over for one more segment and get into a few other issues.
Yeah, you bet.
All right, let's go ahead and do that. When we come back, we're going to get into more issues with Congressman Jodey Arrington here on the Chad Hasty Show, KFYO. Chad Hasty Show, News Talk, 95.1 FM, 790 AM, KFYO. Joining us right now on the phones, it's Congressman Jodey Arrington out in Hockley County. And Congressman, I wanted to switch gears from Second Amendment and gun issues to NAFTA, and this is something that's been in the news, but maybe not in the big, bold headlines of the week. One of your colleagues, Congressman Thornberry, earlier in the week, reportedly said a pullout from NAFTA would be, quote, a devastating blow to agriculture and very harmful to the area economy. What are your thoughts on NAFTA? I know the U.S. is, there's negotiations going on. There's been behind-the-scenes talk, and I know you have some of the Texas delegation a little bit more apprehensive maybe than some other delegations.
Well, let me say that I agree with him. He's in ag land just like I am, and we understand that $850 million worth of trade revenue comes to Texas just because of our trade partner in Mexico. It's a big deal. It's about $120 million for cotton alone. The ag side of NAFTA, Chad, is working well. I mean, there are some gaps, like with dairy in Canada, but also some seasonal produce with Mexico. So it's not perfect. And I know why the president's pushing on this. I would too, because as an American, to lose 700,000 jobs to Mexico, 80% of which are manufacturing, and you've got the auto and textile industries as example that have been hurt by NAFTA, he wants to make sure that we have a level playing field there. And because we've got billions of dollars in deficit in this deal in terms of trade. So, yeah, we've got to fence off to the extent we can agriculture and really focus on some of these other areas. I mean, we can improve in energy. We need e-commerce, new provisions for e-commerce. We can improve on duplications of regulations. There's a lot of ways to improve it, but there is a first do no harm mentality, I think, that we have to have with respect to agriculture.
Do you think the president and the administration is willing just to pull completely out? And if they did, how would that impact West Texas?
Oh, it would be. I think he's right. I think it would be devastating. I can't even contemplate that because our global Mexico, the NAFTA deal represents about 30%, 35% of our total trade worldwide. So the majority of our trade, even agriculture, is in Asia. But, man, that's a big deal. No, I don't support that. He's going to talk tough. That's how he negotiates. That's what he did in the private sector. I'm okay with that. I'm even okay with the good cop, bad cop thing that he does with Rex Tillerson because he needs to be himself and he needs to do what he does to be successful. And I think, first of all, we got beef into China for the first time in 14 years, so I'm going to say it has worked. But we cannot ultimately pull out of NAFTA. We certainly can't with agriculture. That's why I'm saying I think we've got to fence off agriculture to the extent we can. But I think he's doing the right thing to engage him, and this is tough talk. And maybe the folks around the world aren't used to that because we hadn't had a strong America at the negotiating table. So I'm kind of wait and see right now.
Are y'all getting updates, or is the administration talking to members of Congress?
Yeah, I mean, there are things we don't know, I'm sure, because the U.S. Trade Rep is kind of coming through their office. We've had briefings at the Ag Committee, and, the same things we're talking about. I think the Ag folks are concerned about the rhetoric. Some of that rhetoric has had some impact on the market already. But, hey, we've got to negotiate deals that are in the best interest of America. And that's where the president's, that's his starting point. That's his principal position going into this. I don't believe, Chad, ultimately he's going to hurt us and pull out if he knew it would be devastating. That's not why he ran for president. Let him be him. Let him do his thing the way he does it. And let's see where we can go with it. I'm okay with this right now.
Visiting with Congressman Jodey Arrington, you look at the rest of the legislative calendar, and days are ticking by as far as when the Senate's in session and the House is in session, and you guys are able to do some stuff. Hopefully today the Senate will get on board and pass the budget reform that's on their table. Let me ask you this: is the plate becoming too full? Because you have the president put the DACA, the Dreamers, on the plate of Congress. You have tax reform. You have a budget to get through, and then also now it's Iran has been added to the plate. Yeah. It's a pretty full plate with the end of the year coming up pretty soon. So does Congress, in your mind, have the time to get to everything that the president has laid out by the end of the year?
Well, I think a lot of folks who are listening, and I could put myself in the category, probably wonder if Congress can walk and chew gum at the same time. But these are big issues, and they're important issues. But look, we ought to be able to solve DACA. I'm not for amnesty, but I'm not for deporting them. And let's not also put them in front of the line of those who are going through the proper channels. I think these are some basic guidelines and principles going into negotiation that I've heard from my Democrats that they're okay with. But we ought to get border security, and we ought to enforce the law, do away with the sanctuary city baloney, and get some things done there. I see it as an opportunity. But you're right, Chad. I mean, look, the history, the track record of Congress is that they can't do some of these, but we couldn't get health care through the Senate, and we were just negotiating with Republicans. I think we'll get tax reform out of the House, like we did repeal of Obamacare. It'll be teed up in the spring for the early in the new year for the Senate. And if we don't get that, I don't think we keep the majority as Republicans, and we lose the opportunity to advance the conservative agenda. That's my bottom line. That's why I'm putting everything behind this budget and tax reform, because they're linked.
What are your thoughts on the recent moves by the president on, I guess you could say Obamacare, but basically the death knell for Obamacare?
There's a lot going around, swirling around that. I'd say it is unconstitutional to subsidize from the administration. So that cost share subsidy, he's right about that. Mm-hmm. However, you've also got this mandating American people to buy government-designed health care that doesn't work for them and they can't afford. So I really hate that we would hurt anybody by telling them you have to buy this, but we're not going to help you through this transition. However, it's going to push us, hopefully, to at least some bipartisan negotiation so we can move forward and maybe get 20 yards down the field. We're not going to score. We're not going to get any further than we would have had we gotten something out of the Senate on Obamacare repeal. But I can see how kicking that over to Congress would force us to do something that might give us state flexibility, relaxed regulations, a freer market. But that's to be determined. I'm looking at all that. I'm not definitive yet, but it is unconstitutional. The courts ruled that the president and the administration, shall not be funding the cost share subsidies. That ought to come from Congress.
We have just about a minute and a half or so left. In that time, or maybe 2 minutes, in that time, kind of break down for us the high points of the tax reform plan as you know it.
The high points are for West Texans and all Americans keeping more of the money that you work for and earn for your family. But we don't want you just to have more of your current paycheck. President Kennedy, Democrat, President Reagan, both cut or gave breaks to business on investment and on income. And what did that do? Raise wages and household income. We want you to have a greater paycheck and opportunity economically. And we want America to be competitive. We're not today because of our tremendous cost with regs and taxes. So let's make sure we're in a competitive position and we're the envy of the world again economically.
I'm not going to ask you the chances of this passing through the Senate because I know you're probably tired of trying to guess what the Senate's going to do. So I'm not going to even ask you about it, okay? Just ask your listeners to be in prayer that we can actually get the Senate to get this one done. I will say this. It's less complicated. It's pretty straightforward. The main thing is getting offsets so that we don't accelerate deficit reduction while we're cutting taxes. Congressman, I appreciate your time today. We'll visit with you in a couple of weeks.
All the best, Chad. Go West Texas.
That's Congressman Jodey Arrington, Chad Hasty Show, KFYO.